when the House of Representatives decided they would do an investigation of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th and what caused it, they first negotiated a true, legit, bipartisan/nonpartisan expert commission, a blue ribbon commission that would have equal representation from Republicans and Democrats. It would be scrupulously nonpartisan, or at least evenly divided. Democrats in the leadership of the House negotiated that with the Republicans who had been delegated by their leadership to come up with this sort of thing. Both sides came to an agreement. They worked out in detail how this bipartisan, nonpartisan blue ribbon commission would work. They put it up for a vote, and the Republicans voted against it anyway. But after Republicans voted down their own proposal for a bipartisan, nonpartisan expert investigation, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that she wouldn't let the idea die if they wouldn't do something with the Democrats, this sort of expert commission. Instead, she would create in the House a select committee to investigate January 6th. And instead of external experts brought in by both sides to sit in on a blue ribbon expert nonpartisan commission, it will be members of Congress who serve on this select committee. Nancy Pelosi announced that she would appoint Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney and a short list of Democrats. She then invited the Republican leader of the House, Kevin McCarthy, to appoint 5 members as well. And one of the names on his list of 5 appointees was Jim Jordan. Now, how did that go on January 6th between Jim Jordan and Liz Cheney again? You just put that back up. Oh, yeah, there it is. Bottom of page 491. That effing guy, Jim Jordan, that son of a... I smacked his hand away and told him, get away from me, you effing did this. That is on the record. That is a known thing. Kevin McCarthy, like all of us, knew that Liz Cheney was already on that committee. He also had to have known about this recent sort of blockbuster reporting about what went down between Liz Cheney and Jim Jordan inside the House as the House was being attacked on January 6th. And knowing that, what better way to blow up that committee than by trying to slip onto that committee that same Jim Jordan, to sit alongside Liz Cheney to get to the bottom of what really happened that day. Congresswoman Cheney today was asked about Nancy Pelosi's decision to say no to Jim Jordan and one other Republican member of Congress being put on that committee by the House Republicans.
At every opportunity, the minority leader has attempted to prevent the American people from understanding what happened, to block this investigation. Today, the Speaker objected to 2 Republican members. She accepted 3 others. She objected to 2, one of whom may well be a material witness to events that led to that day, that led to January 6th. The other, who disqualified himself by his comments in particular over the last 24 hours, demonstrating that he is not taking this seriously. He is not dealing with the facts of this investigation, but rather viewed it as a political platform. This investigation must go forward. The idea that anybody would be playing politics with an attack on the United States Capitol is despicable and is disgraceful. And I am absolutely dedicated and committed to making sure that this investigation holds those accountable who did this and ensures that it never happens again. And the American people deserve that, and that is what we're going to do.
Congresswoman, do you think you can still get that nonpartisan investigation you want, given that no other Republican but yourself will participate?
I am absolutely confident that we will have a nonpartisan investigation, that it will look at the facts, that it will go wherever the facts may lead. There are 3 members that the minority leader proposed that the Speaker did not object to. She has objected to 2 members, and the rhetoric around this from the minority leader and from those 2 members has been disgraceful. This must be an investigation that is focused on facts, and the idea that any of this has become politicized is really unworthy of the office that we all hold, and unworthy of our republic.
Did you personally urge the Speaker to take this step?
I agree with what the Speaker has done.
Did you personally urge the Speaker to take this step? I agree with what the Speaker has done. Ahem. That is a meaningful dodge. But, you know, it's a serious thing. It's not just that, like, Liz Cheney doesn't enjoy the company of Jim Jordan. I'm sure he's a delightful, you know, dining companion. I mean, what's on record about how she views Jim Jordan is that she thinks he did it, that he's culpable, that he's part of why the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol happened. Right? That reference that she made in the middle of those remarks there to him being a material witness to the crime in question. Listen to that part again.
She objected to two, one of whom may well be a material witness to events that led to that day, that led to January 6th. The other who disqualified himself by his comments in particular over the last 24 hours, demonstrating that he is not taking this seriously.
So House Speaker Nancy Pelosi did intervene today to block 2 of the proposed 5 Republicans from the January 6th commission. And the latter one, described there by Liz Cheney, is Congressman Jim Banks. Jim Banks really did put out a statement once he was named to this committee, saying that this committee shouldn't actually focus on January 6th. It should investigate other protests against police violence and stuff. He said the only reason the House was setting up this January 6th committee was to, quote, malign conservatives. But the other guy who got himself objected to by Nancy Pelosi, Jim Jordan, she's describing him as something different. She is describing him as, in her words, a material witness to the events that the committee is going to investigate. And that is not just a rhetorical shove at Jim Jordan. That's a real thing. And it comes from a real place. Look at this. This is from Politico on December 21st, 2020. Look at the headline. House Republicans meet with Trump to discuss overturning election results. And then there's the subhead there. Trump loyalists are planning a last stand on January 6th. Reporter Melanie Zanona from Politico.com describing in that article a series of 3 long meetings that were held at the White House that day in December. She even got a quote from Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama. Brooks told her, quote, it was a back and forth concerning the planning and strategy for January the 6th. Quote, during Monday's meeting at the White House, where lawmakers noshed on a mid-afternoon snack of meatballs and pigs in a blanket, Trump talked with the members for over an hour about how January 6th would play out. Among the Republicans who met that day in that planning and strategy session to decide what was going to happen on January 6th, this last stand to overturn the election with their actions that day, among the Republicans there for that plotting meeting was Jim Jordan, the congressman from Ohio. You're going to put him on the commission investigating what led up to the events of January 6th? Really? The January 6th Commission is going to be looking at what happened on the day of January 6th and what caused it. Where's a good place to start in terms of what caused it, right? Where's a good place to start in terms of what led Trump supporters to believe that Trump had actually won the presidential election and January 6th would be their chance to block it? Where'd they get that idea?
I think there are big problems with this. I think I don't know how you can ever convince me that President Trump didn't actually win this thing based on all the things you see, the 11 million more votes.
Americans instinctively know there was something wrong with this election. During the campaign, Vice President Biden would do an event and he'd get 50 people at the event. President Trump, at just one rally, gets 50,000 people. Got 11 million more votes than he did in 2016, and House Republicans won 27 of 27 toss-up races. But somehow, the guy who never left his house wins the election?
So that was January 6th on the floor of the House. Jim Jordan making the case that the election must have been stolen, that it shouldn't be certified. Jim Jordan spoke at Stop the Steal rallies. He did media interviews arguing that it was impossible that Trump didn't win, rattling off data and statistics that to him proved that it was impossible that Biden won. This is from Lenig and Rucker's book. Quote, Kellogg, O'Brien, and Kushner brainstormed how to bring the president and vice president back together short of an apology, which Trump would never give. O'Brien proposed having Trump award Pence the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. The others liked the idea. They thought the award could recognize Pence's work chairing the coronavirus task force, though they knew it would be interpreted as a post-insurrection peace treaty. You may remember that never happened. You know who did get the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Trump, though? Jim Jordan. Why did Jim Jordan get it? His contributions to wrestling? Nope. After Jordan helped with promoting the election was stolen from Trump lie, after Jordan plotted with Trump in the White House about what was going to happen on January 6th, after he did try on January 6th to stop the election results from being finalized, even after the riot had been quelled, after he gave this big stem-winder argument about how Trump must have won. He must have. You can just smell it, can't you? Don't you feel it in your gut? After all of that, Trump did not give the Medal of Freedom to Vice President Mike Pence, who had, after all, certified the election. He gave it to Jim Jordan. And then 2 days later, Jim Jordan, of course, led the Republicans in opposition as the House voted to impeach Trump for having incited what happened on January 6th. So, yeah, that was a nice try by the Republicans. But no, he's not going to be on the committee. After Nancy Pelosi made that decision today, the Republicans in the House decided that if Jim Jordan can't be on the committee, then no Republicans can be on the committee. And so now the little ray of sunshine here is that there won't be any of those 5 Republican appointees on the committee. There actually will be a substantive inquiry into the January 6th attack and what led to it without Congressman Jim Jordan and Congressman Banks and anybody else who was being put on the committee overtly and openly with the goal of sabotaging it and derailing it and making sure it couldn't do its work. Instead, they'll actually have a commission that looks at it seriously. The first hearings will be Tuesday.